Hello Daily Drafters, and welcome to the continuation of the Kamigawa Neon Dynasty Archetype Skeleton set review. Here at Daily Draft, we do things a little differently when it comes to set review season. Rather than give a card-by-card analysis and grade each card individually, here we build what are called Archetype Skeletons, one for each color pair. This isn't a concept that I came up with on my own. In fact, it was a common way to provide set review content before card-by-card reviews became more popular. But here at Daily Draft, we'd like to bring them back as I really do think that they can be a valuable resource for determining what each of the 10 color pairs might look like prior to your first drafts of the set. Now, obviously, we won't get everything correct, and these skeletons should be used for the first few drafts of the set for you. As the format evolves and we learn more about the cards in the set and how they interact with each other, the skeletons will evolve as well. But hopefully, these provide a good baseline for you to begin the format. Before we get into today's skeleton, I'd like to give you a breakdown of exactly how I arrived at what I did when it comes to what quantities of each rarity of card that will be included in each deck. I went ahead and collected data from each of the 46 Crimson Vow drafts on the channel when it comes to how many mythics, rares, uncommons, and commons each deck had, and I took an average for each rarity. That average came out to 2 mythic rares or rares, 5 uncommons, and 16 commons. Those numbers, plus 17 lands, make our 40-card draft deck. In addition, I will allow 4 commons to be a 2-of inclusion if I deem necessary, bringing the total to 8 1-of commons and 4 2-of commons. Don't worry, it'll all make sense as we get going. Lastly, I'd like to give a special shout out and thank you to all those in the subscriber community for choosing to spend a part of your day here with me. And for those of you that aren't subscribed yet, go ahead and click that red subscribe button attached to this video. Remember, it's absolutely free, doesn't cost you a dime, and you'll then be able to stay updated all through preview season and into draft season for Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. With that out of the way, let's dive into our skeleton for the day. In this video, we'll be taking a look at Black-White, starting with Naomi, Pillar of Order, which is 3 a white and a black for a 4/4 legendary creature human advisor at uncommon. And it says whenever Naomi enters the battlefield or attacks, if you control an artifact and an enchantment, create a 2/2 white samurai creature token with vigilance. So the Black-White deck in this format keys off of you having both an artifact and an enchantment on the battlefield. This pays you off in a big way for getting to do that when it enters the battlefield and when it attacks. Obviously, a 5-mana 4/4 is a little bit undercosted or overcosted for the size that you're getting. But if you can really get that to trigger even once, and especially more than once, that really gets out of hand. Now, I don't know how easy or difficult it's going to be to have an artifact and an enchantment on the battlefield, but I'm going to give Wizards the benefit of the doubt and say that it should be possible, and I've built this deck in a way that I think it has enough artifacts and enchantments to ensure that at least most of the time you should have one of each on the battlefield. Next up, we've got Banishing Slash, which for 2 white mana is a sorcery at uncommon that says destroy up to 1 target artifact, enchantment, or tapped creature. Then, if you control an artifact and an enchantment, create a 2/2 white samurai creature token with vigilance. Here's another instance of keying off having both an artifact and an enchantment. And in this set, it's going to have more targets than just a tapped creature. Sometimes in this set, this could read as destroy target creature, or tapped creature, because there's so many random artifact creatures and enchantment creatures running around. If this were any other set, I don't think this would be particularly playable, but in the fact that there's so many artifact creatures and so many enchantment creatures, that this is going to hit a lot of what you want it to hit, and in the Black-White deck specifically, if you get an extra 2/2 off of it, this is insane value. Next up, we've got Leech Gauntlet, which for 1 and a black is a 2/2 artifact creature equipment leech at uncommon. It has lifelink, and it says that equipped creature has lifelink and has a reconfigure cost of 4. So here's our first artifact in the deck. It's basically just a 2-mana 2/2 lifelink, and if you have something bigger on the battlefield or something with evasion and you will have 4 extra mana laying around and you want to throw this on that, then you still have the artifact on the battlefield, and then you can start getting in with the lifelink swing. So 2-mana 2/2 lifelink as a baseline is not bad, and at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we have artifacts and enchantments on the battlefield for this deck. This counts as an artifact. Next up is Lethal Exploit, which for 1 and a black is an instant at common. It says that target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. It gets an additional -1/-1 until end of turn for each modified creature you controlled as you cast this spell. The more I've talked about Lethal Exploit as the week has gone on here, I'm not convinced it's going to be a premium removal spell. Like, I don't think it's going to push into the B level. I think it's going to stay into the C's because there's not a lot of black decks that really care about modifications too much. Obviously, there's good reconfigure cards rolling around out there. We already have one in this deck. We might end up with another one. But I think this is going to be 2 mana -2/-2 more often than not, which is a card I'm still willing to include in my deck, but not much more than 1. We got to make sure we're getting good value out of a lot of the removal spells. So I'm cooling off on this as the week goes on, and we'll see how it plays out at the start of the format. Next up is our first of 2 rares in Lion Slash, which is 1 and a white for a 1/1 artifact creature equipment cat at rare. It says that you can pay 1 white mana to exile target card from a graveyard. If it was a permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on Lion Slash. And it gives equipped creature +1/+1 for each +1/+1 counter on Lion Sash with a reconfigure cost of 2. So this, again, is another good reconfigure card. Obviously, this one's at rare, so it's going to be better than the rest. It counts as an artifact for the deck, and I think we're struggling to get a ton of artifacts into this deck that are pretty premium. I think there are better enchantments that we're going to get in this deck that you're going to see soon. Artifacts, I struggled a little bit, so I wanted to find a good rare artifact that would fit in honestly really every deck, but it would be especially good in this one to up our artifact count. Next, we've got Michiko's Reign of Truth, which for 1 and a white is an enchantment saga at uncommon. Chapters 1 and 2 both say that target creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each artifact and or enchantment you control. And Chapter 3 has the same clause that all sagas do in this format, where you exile it, then return it to the battlefield transform under your control as Portrait of Michiko, which is a 0/0 enchantment creature human noble. And Portrait of Michiko gets +1/+1 for each artifact and or enchantment you control. So this is the saga that keys off of artifacts and enchantments. Chapter 1 and 2 will at a baseline give you +1/+1 because it does count itself as an enchantment. And any other artifacts and or enchantments you have only get better with that. And on the backside, it's just the Lord of Artifacts and Enchantments. So it's going to be a baseline of a 1/1 and likely a lot more than that. I think if you can make this consistently a 3/3, this card's going to be a very big performer in your deck, and anything more than that is just gravy. Next is Papercraft Decoy, which for 2 generic mana is a 2/1 artifact creature frog at common. And it says that when Papercraft Decoy leaves the battlefield, you may pay 2 generic mana. If you do, draw a card. The reason I included this one in here is because there are several colorless artifacts in this set. Not a lot of them are particularly great, but I chose one that is an artifact creature that is just generically okay, that you could put in your black-white deck if your artifact count is low. I think this is a card you'll be able to get pretty late in packs. So if you notice that you're going down the black-white train and don't have a good artifact count, I don't think it's the end of the world to include a copy of Papercraft Decoy in your deck. And next we've got Spirited Companion, which for 1 and a white is a 1/1 enchantment creature dog at common. And when it enters the battlefield, draw a card. I think every single white deck, except the most aggressive ones in this format, will take as many Spirited Companions as they can. You will have noticed that in my red-white skeleton, I didn't include any because a 2 mana 1/1 that draws a card is not quite aggressive because it also isn't a samurai or a warrior. But in any other white deck in the format, I think Spirited Companion is going to be a great addition. Not to mention, it counts as an enchantment for our artifact and enchantment count here in black-white. Next, we have Virus Beetle, which for 1 and a black is a 1/1 artifact creature insect at common. And when it enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card. I included this in this deck for a couple of reasons. One reason being is that it's a 2-drop. Another being is that it's an artifact. And the third being that its ETB effect is relevant enough to warrant inclusion. So all of those add up to a card I think I'm totally fine running in black-white. Again, ups our artifact count and gives us just another 2-drop to make sure we can get on the board early enough. Moving to the 3-drops, we've got Chainflail Centipede, which is 2 and a black for a 2/2 artifact creature equipment insect at common. and whenever Chainflail Centipede or equipped creature attacks, it gets +2/+0 until end of turn and has a reconfigure cost of 2. Here's another artifact for the deck. We have a lot of artifacts so far. You'll see a bit more enchantments going forward to even out that balance for us. And I really do think, again, like I said in the last video where I included 2 copies of this in the last black deck that we had, I think Reconfigure is going to overperform in this format. This is much more of an aggressive Reconfigure card, but you know, every deck is interested in attacking. So I think having a copy of Chainflail Centipede will work just fine in this deck. You know, worst case, it's a 3-mana 4/3 attacker that trades, but it does up our artifact count once again. Next, we have 2 copies of Golden Tail Disciple, which is 2 and a white for a 2/3 enchantment creature Fox Monk at common with lifelink. Again, like I mentioned in the last video when I include this one in our last white deck, just a bread and butter common. 3-mana 2/3 lifelink is fine, and the fact that it has the enchantment subtype is going to be really important in both this deck and the green-white deck. And I think I'm going to go ahead and include this one as a 2 of here, and probably in green-white as well, because I think I've noticed that artifacts will be a little bit easier than enchantments to include in this particular deck. And by including 2 of these, we have a good creature, a good blocker, life linker that can up our enchantment count for the black-white deck. Next, we've got 2 more copies of Intercessor's Arrest, which is 2 and a white for an enchantment aura at common. It says enchant permanent. An enchanted permanent can't attack, block, or crew vehicles. Its activated abilities can't be activated unless they're mana abilities. If there's any deck that wants 2 of these, it's this one. Like I mentioned with the last card, I think the enchantment count is going to be the hardest thing to up in this particular deck. This is a removal spell that counts as an enchantment as well. So including 2 copies of it here is a no-brainer, and I wouldn't be surprised if it overperforms in the format in general, but particularly in this black-white deck. Now we have a copy of Nezumi Bladeblesser for 2 and a black. It is a 3/2 creature rat samurai at common. It gets Death Touch as long as you control an artifact, and Menace as long as you control an enchantment. So obviously this keys off of having both an artifact and enchantment. This one doesn't care necessarily if you have both. If you have just one, you still do get the effect that that one provides. But we have to be careful about including too many of these cards that don't count as an artifact or an enchantment themselves, right? If you want to up your artifact and enchantment count, the best cards to do that are cards that care about them and are them themselves. There may not even be very many of those, but we have to make sure that we don't include too many of these so as to take away from the artifact and enchantment count to make cards like this work. Our first rare for the deck is Soul Transfer, which for 1 and 2 black mana is a sorcery at rare. It says choose one. If you control an artifact and an enchantment as you cast this spell, you may choose both. Exile target creature or planeswalker, and or return target creature or planeswalker card from your graveyard to your hand. This isn't the flashiest of rares for this deck necessarily, but again, it keys off of having an artifact and an enchantment, and if you for some reason have both, this card will be absolutely insane. 3 mana sorcery speed, exile target creature is still great removal. 3 mana sorcery speed to bring a creature back to your hand is a little less than what we want, but the modality between the two is already good, and if you can get both of them, this card's going to be absolutely insane. Next is Undercity Scrounger for 2 and a black is a 1/4 artifact creature human rogue at common, and you can tap it to create a treasure token, and you can only activate this if a creature has died this turn. So here's a 3 mana 1/4 blocker. It's going to hold down the fort. It's also an artifact. It also creates artifacts. So the all the cards that key off of you having artifacts and enchantments don't care if they're token or non-token. And if you can even create 1 treasure token with this and don't necessarily need to use it, you can just have that sitting on the battlefield as your 1 artifact, even if your Scrounger dies in combat or gets removed, this is one of those repeatable ways to create artifacts that I talked about. It's not the best one. It's very conditional in the way that you can create those, but I do think that this will provide good value, particularly in this deck. In the 4-drop slot, we have Assassin's Ink, which for 2 and 2 black mana is an instant at uncommon. It costs 1 less to cast if you control an artifact, and 1 less to cast if you control an enchantment. It says destroy target creature or planeswalker. Talked about this before, and 4 mana, instant speed, destroy target creature is a fine enough deal. 3 mana is great, and 2 mana is outstanding. There's a decent chance that a lot of the time in black-white, you're going to get this for 2 mana, and that's an insane deal. 2 black mana, destroy target creature is something you absolutely can't pass up on. If there's a deck for this, it's this one. Next is Kami of Terrible Secrets, which for 3 generic and 1 black mana is a 3/4 creature spirit at common. And whenever Kami of Terrible Secrets enters the battlefield, if you control an artifact and an enchantment, you draw a card and gain 1 life. This is a pretty solid payoff for this deck because the fail case is totally fine. 4 mana 3/4, even if it doesn't get you that card and the 1 point of life gain, is a fine enough fallback to include it in the deck, right? And if you do get that card, it's going to be one of the better cards in your deck. So if we have enough artifacts and enchantments, you definitely will play a copy of this. And if you're really rolling in the dough as far as both of those goes, you can play more than 1 copy of this and feel totally fine about it. Next, we have a copy of Twisted Embrace, which for 2 and 2 black mana is an enchantment aura at common. It enchants artifact or creature you control, and when it enters the battlefield, it destroys target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls, and as long as enchanted permanent is a creature, it gets +1/+1. I've talked about this one at length in the other black videos so far, so I won't spend too much time on it here, but it does up our enchantment count. It's a great removal spell. Happy to include a copy of it. And last but not least, we have Sunblade Samurai, which for 4 and a white is a 4/4 enchantment creature human samurai at common. It has Vigilance, and you can channel it for 2 generic mana to discard it, search your library for a basic plains, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle, and you gain 2 life. Here's 2 more enchantments for the deck. It's a 5 mana 4/4 Vigilance. It has a channel ability to get you out of Mana Screw. It's a great card, goes in pretty much any single white deck in the entire format, fits in greatly here. We'll happily include 2 copies to finish out the deck. I hope this video is helpful in your preparation for Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. Be sure to stick around for the next video in this series, Blue-Green, which will be hitting the channel at 3 p.m. Eastern Time later today. Check out the Neon Dynasty Archetype Skeleton playlist as well to find all of the skeletons in this series in one location. If you enjoyed this content, feel free to give it a like and share it with a friend or 2, as there's a decent chance someone else might like it as well. If you're already subscribed to the channel, thanks for being here today, and if you're not, go ahead and click that subscribe button to stay on top of preview season and have access to consistent high-quality drafts as soon as the set launches on Arena. Looks like that'll do it for this video. I'll see you for the next one.